The coffee mug trembled in her hands. Steam rose between them like unspoken prayers, curling into the morning light that filtered through their kitchen window. Sarah's fingers wrapped around the ceramic handle with the desperation of someone trying to hold on to something already slipping away. The same blue mug David had used for 7 years of marriage, 7 years of ordinary Tuesday mornings that she would have given anything to make last forever. But this wasn't an ordinary Tuesday. Her eyes never left his face as he sat across from her, still in civilian clothes, still looking like the man who would kiss her goodbye and return by evening. Yet the duffel bag by the door told a different story. The folded papers on the counter whispered of deployments in months, counted not in days, but in heartbeats missed. David reached for the sugar bowl, his movements careful, deliberate, as if the simple act of stirring sweetness into his coffee could somehow sweeten what was coming. His wedding ring caught the light as he turned the spoon. 3 gentle circles. Always 3. A ritual she had watched thousands of times, but would now remember as the last. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, pregnant with everything they couldn't say, everything they were afraid to admit. That this coffee might be their last shared morning. That the uniform hanging upstairs would soon replace the man sitting in their kitchen. That love, no matter how fierce, couldn't stop time or orders or the call of duty that pulled him toward danger. Sarah's breath caught as she noticed something that would haunt her for months to come. He had already stopped drinking his coffee. The revelation hit her like ice water. David's mug sat full, untouched, cooling in the space between them. In 7 years of marriage, she had never seen him leave coffee unfinished. Not during late-night study sessions in college. Not during their first apartment's broken heater mornings. Not even during their worst fights, when words cut deeper than any silence could. But this morning, David Michael Harrison, Staff Sergeant, 2nd Infantry Division, couldn't bring himself to drink. Sarah understood why. Because finishing the coffee meant acknowledging the end. It meant standing up from their small wooden table, the one they'd bought at a garage sale during their 2nd year of marriage, when money was tight but dreams were endless. It meant walking toward that olive-green duffel bag that had become an unwelcome guest in their home for the past week. 18 months, that's what the deployment papers said. 18 months in Afghanistan, a place that existed in her mind only through news reports and the worried whispers of other military wives at the commissary. A place that would steal her husband and leave her with empty chairs, cold sheets, and video calls that could never replace the warmth of his hand finding hers in the middle of the night. The kitchen held witness to their love story. The refrigerator still bore photos from their honeymoon in Charleston, corners curled from years of magnetic embrace. Their wedding invitation, now faded, hung near the window where Sarah had placed it to catch the morning light. Sarah Elizabeth and David Michael. It read, "Together, forever." The paper seemed to mock them now, as if love alone could defy military orders and geopolitical tensions half a world away. David's dress blues hung on the bedroom door upstairs, pressed and perfect, waiting to transform the man she loved into the soldier his country needed. The transformation was already beginning. She could see it in the way his shoulders had straightened over the past days, the way his jaw set a little firmer when he read the news, the way he'd started saying "when I get back" instead of "if I get back," as if hope could be commanded like troops. The morning light shifted, casting longer shadows across their breakfast table, where 2 pieces of toast sat growing cold, where the jam jar remained unopened, where normalcy came to die one mundane detail at a time. For 3 weeks, Sarah had practiced this moment in her mind. She had rehearsed it while folding his extra socks, rolling them tight the way the army taught him, each pair a small promise that he would need them, that he would come home to wear them again. She had practiced her goodbye smile while packing his toiletries, running her fingers over his razor, his cologne, the small bottle of Advil she'd insisted on including because he got headaches when he was stressed. And she wouldn't be there to massage his temples. The hardest part wasn't the big moments, it was the small ones that kept ambushing her. Like Tuesday afternoons, when she automatically bought 2 apples at the grocery store, forgetting for a split second that soon she would eat alone. Or Wednesday evenings, when she found herself setting 2 plates on the counter before remembering that soon dinner would be a solo affair, accompanied only by the hum of their refrigerator and the voices from whatever TV show she'd used to fill the silence. David had his own rituals of preparation, though he tried to hide them. She'd caught him standing in their bedroom doorway at 2 a.m. 3 nights ago, just looking, taking mental photographs. She realized, memorizing the way moonlight fell across their unmade bed, the way her reading lamp cast warm circles on the wall, the way her books stacked haphazardly on the nightstand, organized chaos that somehow made perfect sense to both of them. He'd started leaving little notes in places he thought she wouldn't find until after he was gone. She'd discovered one tucked inside her jewelry box. "Your laugh is the first thing I'll miss, and the last thing I'll remember." Another was folded inside her favorite coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle that she refused to throw away. "Every sunrise will remind me of the morning light in your eyes." But the notes broke something inside her each time she found them, because they felt too much like goodbye, too permanent, too much like someone preparing for forever instead of 18 months. The night before, they had tried to make love with the desperate hunger of people facing famine. But halfway through, Sarah had started crying, not the gentle tears of overwhelming emotion, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose heart was being torn in two. David had held her, his own tears falling silently into her hair, and they had simply breathed together in the darkness, skin against skin, heartbeat against heartbeat, trying to memorize the rhythm of being one person instead of two. This morning, she had woken early to make his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, the expensive kind they usually saved for special occasions. But as she stood over the stove, flipping golden circles of batter, she realized that every morning from now on would be special because it was finite. Every shared breath, every stolen glance, every mundane moment had become precious because soon they would be memory instead of reality. The stack of pancakes sat untouched between them now, growing cold like everything else in their kitchen. David's deployment checklist lay beside his plate, each item marked with his precise handwriting. Documents, check. Medical records, check. Emergency contacts, check. Will, check. That last one had made her stomach drop when she'd seen it. They were 26 and 28 years old. Too young for wills, too young for goodbyes that felt this permanent, too young to understand that love and duty could coexist in the same heart and tear it apart simultaneously. David stared at his reflection in the black surface of his untouched coffee and saw two men looking back. One was the husband who had promised Sarah forever on a beach in Charleston, who had carried her over the threshold of their first apartment, who still reached for her hand in his sleep even after 7 years of marriage. The other was Staff Sergeant Harrison, the soldier who had sworn an oath to defend his country, who had trained for moments like this, who understood that some promises were bigger than personal happiness. For 3 weeks, these two men had been at war inside his chest. The husband wanted to throw the deployment papers in the trash, to resign his commission, to choose love over duty, and spend his life making pancakes on Tuesday mornings and watching Sarah read novels, with her feet tucked under his legs on their worn couch. The soldier knew that 18 months in Afghanistan wasn't just about him, it was about the 22 men under his command who needed a leader they could trust, about the mission that might save lives, about the oath he'd taken that was supposed to mean something beyond convenience. Last night, after Sarah had fallen asleep against his chest, David had lain awake, thinking about his father. Colonel William Harrison had deployed 6 times during David's childhood, and David had spent those deployments hating him for choosing the Army over family dinners and baseball games and bedtime stories. Only now, holding his own wife, while she trembled in her sleep, did David understand that his father hadn't chosen the army over family. He had chosen the army for family, for a world where little boys could grow up safe enough to hate their fathers for being gone instead of being grateful they were alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. David had joined the military to prove he was different from his father, to serve his country without sacrificing his family. But here he sat, in his kitchen, about to break his wife's heart, the same way his father had broken his mother's, obeer and obeer, deployment after deployment, until love became something measured in months between goodbyes. His phone buzzed against the table, a text from his commanding officer. Transport leaves at 0800 safe travels. Sergeant. David deleted the message without showing Sarah. She didn't need another reminder that time was running out, that in 2 hours he would walk out their front door and not return for a year and a half. If he returned at all, the thought was a cold knife in his stomach. But it was real, and he owed it to Sarah to acknowledge that reality even if he couldn't voice it. Afghanistan wasn't a training exercise. Men came home changed, if they came home at all. David had lost 3 friends in the past 2 years. Good soldiers, better men, who had left behind wives and children and empty chairs at kitchen tables, just like this one. He forced himself to look at Sarah across their small table, to memorize the way morning light caught the gold in her brown hair, the way she bit her lower lip when she was trying not to cry, the way her wedding ring caught the light as she gripped her coffee mug like a lifeline. In 6 months, when the desert heat made it hard to remember what rain felt like, he would need these details. In 12 months, when exhaustion made everything blur together, he would need to remember exactly how she looked in this moment. The worst part wasn't leaving. The worst part was not knowing who would come back to this kitchen when his deployment ended. War changed men, and David was honest enough to admit he might not be the same husband who was breaking her heart this morning. The clock on their kitchen wall had become their enemy. 7:23 a.m. 37 minutes until David had to leave for the base. 37 minutes to say everything they had avoided saying for 3 weeks, or to continue pretending that silence could somehow stop time from moving forward. Sarah's hands had started to shake again. Not the gentle tremor from earlier, but the full-body vibration of someone fighting to hold themselves together. She set down her coffee mug with deliberate care, the small clink of ceramic against wood sounding impossibly loud in their quiet kitchen. David's eyes followed the movement, and she saw him memorizing even that. The way her fingers lingered on the handle, the way she looked anywhere except at his face. "I should start the car," he said finally, his voice rough with unspoken emotion. But he didn't move. Neither of them moved, because moving meant acknowledging that time was real, that 8 a.m. was coming, whether they willed it or not. Outside their window, the neighborhood was waking up to another ordinary Tuesday. Mrs. Peterson was walking her ancient golden retriever, the same route they had taken every morning for the past 5 years. The mailman was making his rounds, whistling something that drifted through their thin walls. Children's voices echoed from the school bus stop 3 houses down, high and carefree and blissfully unaware that in this small kitchen a world was ending. 7:26 a.m. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Your thermos," she said, grasping for normalcy like a drowning woman reaching for driftwood. "You'll need coffee for the drive." Her voice cracked on the word drive because they both knew it wasn't just a drive. It was the beginning of 18 months of distance, measured not in miles, but in heartbeats. She moved to the coffee maker with jerky, desperate movements, as if making coffee could somehow make this morning normal, as if the simple act of filling his thermos could transform deployment into just another day at work, where he'd kiss her goodbye and return by evening with stories about difficult officers and boring meetings. David watched her pour coffee with the concentration of someone memorizing a sacred ritual, the way she added exactly 2 sugars without measuring, The way she tested the temperature with her pinky, the way she screwed on the lid with 3 quick turns. Clockwise. Always clockwise. Because she was methodical about everything, except letting go. 7:28 a.m. The thermos sat between them on the counter like a small, silver bridge between this moment and the next. David picked it up, feeling its warmth through the metal, knowing that in an hour it would be the only piece of home he'd have until evening, when he'd call her from base housing before catching his transport to Dover Air Force Base. Sarah, her name came out like a prayer, like an apology, like a goodbye he wasn't ready to say. She turned toward him, and for the first time that morning, they looked directly at each other. Really? Look? Her eyes were bright with unshed tears that threatened to spill over. His were dark with a pain that went deeper than words. In that look, they said everything they had been avoiding, that they were terrified, that 18 months felt like forever. That love wasn't always enough to bridge the distance between duty and desire. 7:30 a.m. The sound of a car door slamming outside made them both jump. Someone else's goodbye. Someone else's normal Tuesday morning where the person they loved would come home by evening. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding them frozen in this moment of almost goodbye. David set the thermos down and closed the distance between them in 2 steps. His hands found her face, thumbs brushing away tears that had finally escaped despite her fierce attempt at control. Sarah's hands gripped his wrists as if she could anchor him to this moment, to this kitchen, to her. "I love you," he whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "I love you more than anything in this world. And I need you to remember that every single day I'm gone." 7:33 a.m. The countdown continued, indifferent to love, indifferent to the way time could stretch like taffy in moments of joy and compress like a spring in moments of loss. 27 minutes until his heart walked out the door wearing combat boots, leaving her to learn how to breathe again in the sudden quiet of their too-empty home. 7:55. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until David Michael Harrison ceased to be her husband and became a soldier again. Until he walked out their front door and into a world she couldn't follow, couldn't protect him from, couldn't share. They stood in the hallway now, beside the duffel bag that had haunted their home for a week. David was dressed in his ACUS Army combat uniform, the desert camouflage that transformed him from the man who made her laugh until her sides hurt into someone she recognized but didn't fully know. The fabric was crisp, professional, impersonal. It smelled like military laundry detergent and unfamiliarity. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached up to straighten his name tape, though it was already perfect. Harrison in black letters across his chest, right above his heart that was beating so hard she could see his pulse jumping in his throat. Her fingers lingered there, feeling his heartbeat through the thick fabric, memorizing the rhythm that had lulled her to sleep for 7 years. "Your wallet?" she whispered, though she knew he had already checked it 3 times. "Your phone charger." "Yo, Sarah." His voice was gentle but firm, the way it got when he was trying to hold himself together. "I have everything. Everything except the life they had built together in this small house, with its creaking floors and temperamental water heater and kitchen table where they had shared 7 years of morning coffee and dreams and mundane conversations that now seemed precious beyond measure." David lifted his hands to frame her face, his thumbs catching tears she didn't realize were falling. "Look at me," he said softly. "Really, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, those green eyes that had looked at her with love and laughter and desire, and now looked at her with a pain so deep it took her breath away. In them, she saw the boy who had proposed on one knee in their tiny apartment, nervous and stammering and so sure that forever was possible. She saw the man who had held her through 3 months, who had painted their bedroom yellow because it was her favorite color, who had learned to braid her hair when she was sick with the flu and too weak to do it herself. "I need you to promise me something," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need you to live while I'm gone. Really live. Not just exist, not just wait for me to come home. Live. Sarah shook her head. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Because living seemed impossible when half her heart was about to board a transport plane to Afghanistan. Because breathing seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford when he wouldn't be there to steal the covers and make terrible jokes and leave coffee rings on her novels. Promise me, he insisted, his forehead pressed against hers. Promise me you'll laugh. Promise me you'll go out with your sister. Promise me you'll still buy yourself flowers on Fridays. Promise me you'll remember that you're Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, not just David Harrison's wife waiting for him to come home. The tears came harder now, ugly and desperate and beyond her control. I can't, she sobbed against his chest. I can't promise that. I can't promise to be okay when you're not here. You don't have to be okay, David said, his own voice breaking now. You just have to be alive. You just have to be here when I come back. When, not if. Even now, in this moment of shattering, he gave her hope, wrapped in certainty. Outside, a car horn honked twice, his ride to base, punctual and impersonal and utterly indifferent to the way love could break apart in a suburban hallway on a Tuesday morning. 8 a.m. Time had run out. David's hands shook as he picked up his duffel bag, the weight of it symbolic of everything he was carrying away from this moment. His wedding ring caught the morning light streaming through their front window, the same ring she had placed on his finger 7 years ago when they believed love could conquer anything, even distance, even time, even war. The kiss came without warning, desperate, fierce, tasting of salt, tears, and coffee and goodbye. Sarah poured everything into it. 7 years of love, 18 months of longing yet to come. The words she couldn't say, the fears she couldn't voice, the hope she couldn't quite release. David kissed her back with equal desperation, as if he could leave part of himself behind in the warmth of her lips, as if love could be transferred through touch and held in her heart until his return. When they broke apart, both were crying openly, no longer trying to be strong for each other, no longer pretending this wasn't the hardest thing either of them had ever done. David stepped back, shouldered his bag, and walked toward the door without looking back, because looking back would have broken what little resolve he had left. The door opened with a familiar creak, the same sound it had made thousands of times before, but this time it sounded like an ending. Sarah watched through the window as he walked to the waiting car, his shoulders straight, his stride military. He was already becoming the soldier again, even as her husband disappeared into the morning light. The car pulled away at 8:03 a.m., taking her heart with it into a world of sand and danger and distances too vast to bridge with anything but faith. Sarah stood at the window long after the car disappeared around the corner, long after the sound of the engine faded into the ordinary hum of suburban morning. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, a woman she barely recognized, with red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks and the hollow expression of someone who had just watched their world drive away in a government sedan. The house felt different now, not just empty, but altered, as if David's departure had changed the molecular structure of their home. The air seemed thinner, the silence heavier, the familiar rooms suddenly unfamiliar without his presence to give them meaning. Even the kitchen, where they had shared their last breakfast just minutes ago, felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. She walked back to their table where 2 cold cups of coffee sat like sentinels guarding the remnants of their final morning. David's plate still held the untouched pancakes she had made with such hope, such desperate love. The deployment checklist lay beside it, completed except for one final item he had added in his careful handwriting. Come home to Sarah. The tears came again, but softer now, the kind of crying that comes after the storm has passed and left only the wreckage behind. Sarah picked up David's coffee mug, still half full, still bearing the faint warmth of his hands, and held it against her chest like a talisman. In 18 months, when he walked back through their front door, this mug would be waiting. She would be waiting, because that's what military wives did. They waited. They became experts in time zones and international calling rates, and the specific quality of silence that comes from loving someone you cannot touch. They learned to sleep alone in beds that suddenly felt too big, to cook for one when their hearts still set to plates, to celebrate anniversaries through pixelated video calls where "I love you" arrived 3 seconds after the lips that spoke it. But Sarah was beginning to understand something that surprised her in its clarity. Waiting wasn't passive. Waiting was an act of defiance against despair, a choice to believe in futures that couldn't be guaranteed, a decision to keep loving someone even when love became something measured in letters and phone calls and care packages sent across oceans. In the weeks to come, she would learn the rhythm of this new life. She would discover that Tuesdays were the hardest because they reminded her of this morning, that Friday nights required extra courage because they had always been theirs, that the sound of helicopters on the news would make her heart stop until she remembered that David was thousands of miles away from whatever tragedy was unfolding on her television screen. She would also learn unexpected strengths, that she could fix the garbage disposal herself, that she was braver than she had known, that love could stretch across continents without breaking. She would find community with other wives who understood the specific ache of loving someone in uniform, women who could read the fear in each other's eyes without words, who celebrated safe arrival calls with the fervor of religious converts. Most importantly, she would learn to honor David's request. She would live, not just exist. She would buy herself flowers on Fridays, not because she was replacing his tradition, but because she was honoring it. She would laugh with her sister, pursue the photography course she had always postponed, plant the garden they had talked about but never started, not because she was moving on, but because she was moving forward, carrying their love with her instead of letting it become a weight that kept her anchored to this morning's pain. Because David Michael Harrison hadn't just asked her to wait for him. He had asked her to become someone worth coming home to, someone who had grown and thrived and lived fully in his absence. He had asked her to trust that love could survive distance, that promises made in suburban kitchens could endure the test of desert heat and military orders, and the 1,000 small deaths that came with loving someone whose job was danger. The clock on the wall chimed 8:30 a.m. Somewhere, David was probably boarding his transport, checking his gear, becoming fully the soldier he needed to be. And here, in their kitchen, where it all began, Sarah was learning to become who she needed to be. Not just the woman who said goodbye, but the woman who would be ready to say welcome home. If this story of love and sacrifice, of ordinary kitchens transformed into battlegrounds of the heart, has touched you, please subscribe to witness more moments that remind us why some goodbyes are really promises in disguise, and why the strongest love is often measured not in presence, but in the courage to let go.